This wasn't a chemical spill. It wasn't some plant upstream venting what it shouldn't. State biologists ruled out contamination before the rumors even had time to set. But on the Peoria Pool in June of 2026, silver carp were washing up dead by the thousands. You smell it before you see it. Everyone who was out there that month says the same thing. That thick, sweet rot riding the wind off the water before the bank ever comes into view. And then the bank comes into view, and it's not mud, and it's not gravel. It's fish. Silver carp stacked 2 and 3 deep in windrows. Silver bellies turned up to the sun. Some of them still twitching in the shallows where the current pinned them. By the third day, people were reporting dead fish along nearly the whole 66-mile stretch between Henry and the Peoria Lock and Dam. Boaters ran through drifts of them for 10 minutes at cruising speed, the props kicking up more with every pass. State biologists have an explanation. It's clean, it's on the record, and it leaves out one detail they can't explain. Something in that water is killing fish by the thousands, and it's not spawning stress. It's something that's been growing in that river for years, getting big enough to matter. Here's the record, plain and on paper. The Die Off runs the length of the Peoria Pool, a 66-mile stretch of the Illinois River between Henry and the Peoria, Lock and Dam, and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources calls it a naturally occurring event. Their fisheries chief, Michael McClelland, put it this way: spawning takes a huge amount of energy, and that kind of physiological load can push a fish past what its body can handle. Add in the water chemistry shifts that come with a heavy rain, rising temperatures, a river doing what a river does every spring, and you've got their answer. Stress killed them. Here's what the agency ruled out, and it matters just as much as what they claimed. No chemical contamination, no pollution, and no impact on native species. Read that last line again, because it's doing quiet work in that statement. Whatever's happening in that water is landing on one species and leaving everything else alone. The investigation itself moved fast, which tells you something about how seriously the state took it. Field crews pulled water samples up and down the pool inside of 48 hours, testing for the usual suspects: dissolved oxygen levels, ammonia, anything that would point to a spill or a sewage overflow feeding into the system. Every test came back inside normal range. Whatever killed these fish did it without leaving the kind of fingerprint field biologists know how to find. But the distribution told a different story. Boaters reported the carcasses stacked heaviest in the same slow stretches where the river deepens, not scattered evenly downstream like a stress event would leave them. Spawning stress doesn't drift in the same hunting grounds mile after mile. Now sit with how strange that actually is. Silver carp spawn in rising water and warming temperatures every single year. That's not a rare alignment of conditions. That's just June on the Illinois River. If spawning stress alone could produce windrows of dead fish stacked on the bank, this would have happened before, every year, on schedule. It hasn't. Stress explains a fish that's tired. It doesn't explain a fish that's dead in numbers big enough to change how a river smells. This is the same species that has absorbed 50 million pounds of removal effort over 15 years and kept rebuilding every season like nothing happened. The IDNR's own statement admits they don't have a hard number for how many fish died, and that gap matters more than it looks. An agency confident in a natural explanation usually wants a number, because a number lets you measure this event against other spawning seasons and show it falls inside a normal range. Instead, what you get is extensive and language about significant portions of the pool, phrasing that sounds careful right up until you notice it's also vague enough to cover almost anything. So the paperwork says nature did this to itself, but a river that's been producing this many carp this consistently for years doesn't just collapse on a bad spawn. Something else is in that water. The something else was already in the water. It just took an invasion to make it big enough to notice. Blue catfish are native to the Mississippi Basin, and for most of their history, they were a solid catch. Nothing that changed how you thought about the river. Under the right conditions, though, blue catfish can top 100 pounds, and a backwater of the Mississippi near Alton, Illinois, not far from where the Illinois River pours into it, just handed them those conditions on a plate. Researchers pulled stomach contents from 68 blue catfish caught in that backwater, all in the 22 to 40 inch range, expecting the usual mix of shad and whatever else drifts through open water. What they found instead was adult silver carp sitting at the top of the list by weight, not a stray meal, not something these catfish stumbled into once. The top item. The age detail is where this stops being background noise and starts being alarming. The average silver carp pulled from inside these catfish was 3.9 years old, which puts it right at the edge of sexual maturity, since female silver carp typically start breeding at age 3 or 4. These catfish aren't cleaning up leftovers. They're taking out breeding age fish before they get a chance to spawn again. And the size these catfish are reaching on that diet is worth putting a number to. Fish pulled from the system have topped 100 pounds, heavier than a grown man, built partly on a food source that wasn't sitting in this water a generation ago. It's not just catfish either. Researchers went through the stomach contents of more than 1,500 native predatory fish pulled from another stretch of the Illinois River, and gar came out on top by a wide margin. Asian carp made up half of everything found inside their stomachs, and that held up because gar are built for exactly this kind of ambush feeding. Long jaws lined with needle teeth designed to grab something that's trying to twist away and not let go. Whitebase told a different story, selectively hunting down small carp fresh off a spawn, with those young carp packed into their stomachs in numbers way out of proportion to how common they should have been in a random diet. And the rest of the predatory fish community, channel catfish, flathead catfish, largemouth bass, black crappie, and white crappie, were all working the same food source from different angles. What that split tells you is this isn't one predator doing one job. Small carp, soft and still growing, are getting hit hard by gar and white base working the shallows and current edges. Adult carp, 3 or 4 years old and heavy enough to survive most predators, are the ones blue catfish specialize in, because it takes a fish with a mouth that big to swallow something that size whole. Different predators are working different rungs of the same ladder, and together they're squeezing this population from both ends at once. The fish that was supposed to overwhelm this river turned into the fuel that grew its native predators past any ceiling they used to have. Catfish did this on their own. They adapted to what was already swimming past them and got bigger because of it. The next predator in this story didn't adapt to anything. Somebody brought it back. Illinois didn't have alligator gar for about 50 years. They were wiped off the map here, through habitat loss and deliberate removal. Now, the state is putting them back in on purpose, specifically because of what's swimming in that river. Picture something 6 to 8 feet long, plated in scales so hard, early settlers used them to tip plows, with a snout built like a crocodile's, and 2 rows of teeth lining the jaw instead of 1. That's alligator gar, and the design hasn't changed much in 100 million years. This is a fish that was already old when the rivers it swims in didn't exist yet in their current shape. People saw a fish that big, with a mouth like that, and decided it was a threat instead of something worth keeping around. So they eradicated it on purpose. That's the record. Not neglect, a choice. The eradication wasn't one law or one bad season. It built up over decades. Wetland drainage and channel dredging through the early and mid-1900s cut alligator gar off from the slow backwaters and floodplain pools they need to spawn in, and state-sponsored rough fish control programs actively targeted them right alongside carp and other species officials, at the time lumped together as nuisance fish, not worth protecting. By the middle of the century, confirmed sightings in Illinois waters had basically stopped. The fish wasn't hiding. it was gone. Bringing it back took decades of its own. Illinois DNR started a stocking program using hatchery-raised alligator gar, tagging and tracking every release to measure survival and growth in the wild, checking whether the habitat that once supported them could support them again. Early releases went into protected backwaters, where staff could monitor them closely before anyone tried putting fish into open river current. The hatchery side alone takes years. Biologists spawn adult gar in controlled tanks, raise the fingerlings past the size where a bass or a heron could make a meal of them, then implant tiny tracking tags before a single fish goes back into the wild. Every one of those tagged fish gets checked on for years afterward, pulled up in survey nets, measured, weighed, and released again, building a record of exactly how fast they grow and how many make it to adulthood in water that hasn't held them in half a century. That data is what tells biologists whether the reintroduction is actually taking, not just whether fish went into the river, but whether they're surviving long enough to breed on their own and start doing this without any more help from a hatchery truck. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't guaranteed to work, but the population has taken hold enough that biologists are now talking about what a mature gar population could mean for a river carrying more invasive carp than it's ever carried before. Here's where the story bends back on itself. The same agencies that once helped erase alligator gar from Illinois waters are now the ones stocking it back in, on purpose, specifically because of what's swimming in that river now. That's not irony for its own sake. That's a wildlife agency looking at an invasion it can't beat with nets and barriers alone and reaching for a tool it threw away 2 generations ago. Researchers call this integrated pest management, and it's worth being straight about what that phrase actually means. It's not a silver bullet. It's one tool sitting next to commercial removal crews, next to the electric barrier holding the line 37 miles from Lake Michigan, next to every other method already working this river. Gar and grown catfish get added to that list, not swapped in to replace it. And the biology backs the decision up without needing any hedging. Alligator gar are ambush predators, built to hang motionless in slack water and current seams, patient in a way most fish aren't. Armored enough that almost nothing in that river threatens them once they're grown. A fish that size, with a mouth that size, can take prey as big as a mature silver carp. That's the design brief. And here's where the agencies stay honest instead of overselling it. The people running this program are the same ones who'll tell you straight that this is a fight still being measured, not a war already won. So the die-off on that riverbank isn't the end of anything. It's the part you can actually see, the visible edge of something that's been building underwater for years. Those dead carp stacked on the bank in June weren't a mystery solved. They were proof that the Illinois River has started fighting back on its own terms, one grown catfish and one returning ancient predator at a time. Next time you're on that river, think about what's down there that wasn't there 30 years ago. The fish you can't see are the ones rewriting what this water can hold. If you want the next one when it surfaces, go ahead and subscribe. And if you've fished this stretch of the Illinois, drop it in the comments. I want to know what you've pulled out of that water.